course, in Hebrew, but this is just the way it is. If you're going to, note inspiration here, then this is what you got. I think the question is a bit of importance because the enemy, of God we know as Satan, again, because we use the New Testament, obviously. That enemy, again, is the rebel of Eden because the New Testament makes the identification, even if the Old Testament doesn't. He gets cast down to earth, which is eretz in Hebrew, which also is one of the words for underworld, the realm of the dead. And that's significant because the being that's cast down in rebellion, if we look at the New Testament, that being has no authority over believers. And frankly, when he's cast down to the earth or the underworld, he has no authority in the divine council from that point on. People know my view is that the Nakash, the divine rebel of Genesis 3, was a divine council member. Again, get the unseen realm, you'll read all about that. He has no authority in the council from that point on because he is in rebellion and has been punished.
Hey everyone, this is Joseph. Welcome to the channel. We're going to take a look at an interview with Michael Heiser.
Accounts of Jesus. For now, Dr. Heiser, one of the first questions I thought is you've written at least 3 books that I'm aware of on angels, demons, and unseen realm. Why would you write on this world of all the things that you could study?
I was providentially poked in the eye by God. I mean, that's really the best answer I could give you. As I relate in Unseen Realm, that book preceded these other 2. And Unseen Realm is sort of a Genesis to Revelation overview of biblical theology with an eye toward how the unseen world intersects with the human world intentionally in Scripture. And that was provoked by an experience I had as a doctoral student. I'm just sitting in church, one Sunday morning and killing some time with a friend who was also in the Hebrew department. And I don't know what the discussion was. I can't remember what we were talking about, but the way it ended was life-changing. He just handed me his Hebrew Bible and said, you need to read Psalm 82 in Hebrew. And so I did. And you find out there that God, Elohim, is castigating, excoriating a group of gods, other Elohim Nitzav Ba'adat El. God stands in the divine assembly, B'kerev Elohim Yishpot, in the midst of the gods, midst of the Elohim, he passes judgment. And I read that, and it's like, that sounds like a pantheon. I mean, I had no other word for it. And it was just shocking. It wasn't hard Hebrew, it's just right there. And, that took me down a certain path. Providentially, again, I was fortunate to, after I asked the initial question, how did I never see this before? I mean, I'm not a newbie. I'm a doctoral student, in a Hebrew, Bible program at a major university. I've taught 15 classes. I've taught 5 years on the Bible college level. I have 2 master's degrees. How did I not see this? I've been to seminary. I've been to Bible college. And my second thought, again, providentially, was, I'll bet Jesus knew this song. I bet the apostles knew it.
Interesting.
There must be a way to parse this. And that set me on a course. And now, in hindsight, I'm not making this up. This is not an exaggeration. Looking back, I had 1 clock hour, not credit hour, clock hour, 60 minutes. In 15 years of undergraduate and graduate training, 60 minutes on angels and demons.
Interesting.
Now, with that kind of neglect, it teaches you something passively, like this stuff can't be important or else they'd spend more time on it. And here I was sitting in a church looking at Psalm 82 in Hebrew and frankly just getting poked in the eye. You know how it is. You get to a doctoral program, you've been in ministry for a while, you kind of get the sense that, okay, I got the lay of the land here. I know most, I know more Bible than most people in church. I can navigate questions. I feel called to do this, and I'm on the right path. And all of a sudden, it's like you don't know anything.
Wow.
It's like you know nothing. This is so fundamental. God. Okay, I remember sitting there thinking, I got a dissertation to write. How in the world can I can't let my mind just get drawn by questions like monotheism. I mean, I'm supposed to have this figured out. And it just stopped me in my tracks. And so once I got into it, I couldn't give it up. I had the answer to this. Then I started to run into Second Temple period, intertestamental period text.
Gotcha.
It got into the supernatural world, and the fact that, well, we have the Satan figure, and we've got Genesis 6, we've got three rebellions, not just one. Where did Judaism get this crazy idea that demons are, were the disembodied spirits of Nephilim? I mean, it's all over the Dead Sea Scrolls, and like, what are they thinking? But I hadn't been exposed to any of it.
Gotcha.
Zero. Okay, and that just sort of sucked me down the rabbit hole, or got me into the vortex, and I couldn't give it up. So it became part of my dissertation. My dissertation was on the Divine Assembly, the Divine Council in
Gotcha.
Second Temple Jewish literature and later texts in the Hebrew Bible, and it now I look back on it and think this is so fundamental. What I now call the Divine Council worldview and the Deuteronomy 32 worldview. This is so fundamental to biblical theology that once you see it, you can't unsee it. It just shows up everywhere. And the wonderful thing is the Bible's filled with all these weird passages that we as moderns, we are, whether we like to admit it or not, we are believing skeptics because we were raised in a modern world, post-Enlightenment. And so we're not predisposed to a full supernatural worldview. As Christians, we tend to be very selective about this. And I'm not talking about charismania stuff.
Sure.
I'm not charismatic. I don't have any background in that. What I'm talking about here is we find it somehow intellectually respectable to believe in things like a Trinity and the incarnation and the hypostatic union and the deity of Christ, but we can't believe in things like Genesis 6 or like real principalities, and we can't like affirm Daniel 10's theology.
Right.
We balk at all these passages, and it's like, look, fellas, they come from the same book. Okay, how can this be intellectually coherent to embrace this set of things and reject this set of things? And I was confronted by that question. That's just, I was, again, I took a good poke in the eye, actually a few pokes in the eye, again, by providence, that I had to cross the Rubicon, so to speak, of, and this is going to sound so simple, maybe even simplistic, but I remember just sitting there as a doctoral student thinking, I have to make a decision whether I'm going to read the Bible through the eyes of the people that God prompted to produce the thing, their worldview, and the worldview of the people they were writing to that were alive at the same time. I have to decide to either do that or be content with filtering the Bible through my own tradition. And I liked my tradition. There was nothing wrong with it, But it was like, and I knew that if you go down this road, it's going to cost you some friendships. It's going to cost you, maybe a job. It's not the norm. Just the simple idea. I mean, Christians talk about interpreting the Bible in context all the time. Oh, look, they used lamps back in Israel. Oh, they had pots and pans, and they had cisterns. Okay, I get it, but worldview is a huge deal. Okay, the biblical writers they were not us. They are not us. They don't look at the world the way we do. They are predisposed to a supernaturalistic worldview, and they confront us in Scripture. To me, this has become an issue of biblical authority. Am I going to submit my post-Enlightenment 21st century intellectual worldview to the worldview of the biblical writers? Can I do that? And it was a little scary.
That's a great question, because I sense in the book there's a real honesty and willingness to say, hey, where does this lead, even if it makes us uncomfortable, and I appreciate that. Let's jump into the beginning. You mentioned a whole lot of things I kind of want to unpack a little bit for our viewers here, and one is, it seems like we read back stuff from the New Testament into the Old Testament that probably wasn't there at that time. And one of the distinctions you make early in the book is that the word demons only appears 3 times in the Old Testament, depending on how we translate certain words. Why is that important to understand what's going on in the Old Testament? And what are some of the different ways that these evil spirits are described?
Yeah, we have a significant problem with terminology. I mean, I do this out of the gate in the angels book, and I do a little bit of it in the demons book as well. But the Old Testament has a very rich vocabulary for what's going on, both the good guys and the bad guys, that we lack almost entirely because of the flow of history and things like the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible getting translated into Greek, and then the New Testament also being in Greek. So most of the time they quote the Old Testament, they're using that translation. A lot of the nuancing is just lost. And this is a classic example. Shadim is the word you're referring to in the Old Testament. It's not a demon like you would think in the Gospels. It doesn't describe that. It's rather, it can be, and I think it is, in those contexts in the Old Testament, a territorial entity. And the reason that makes the best sense is its use in Deuteronomy 32 in the context of, again, the Deuteronomy 32 worldview that we can talk about. But that's just one example. What do you do with that? I mean, how do you know unless you look? You're a reader of the English Bible. And even if you are, let's just go down that trajectory. Let's say you're just a reader of the English Bible and you run across the word demons a few times, but they don't possess anybody. They're never cast out of anybody. I mean, it's a very logical question to ask, hey, if there's no possessions in the Old Testament and exorcisms, why in the world, when Jesus showed up and he starts doing this, do they consider this a sign of his messiahship? Where'd that come from? There's no Old Testament precedent for it, or so we think. Again, because we're steered in one direction by, again, the way English translations are what they are, but there's just a lot of terminology that's lost. And in the end, what I try to articulate in the books is that just generally you have 3 buckets, 3 terminology buckets. You've got terms for the heavenly host that describe what a member of the heavenly host is. Those would be your ontological terms, okay, what it is. Okay. Things like spirits. Elohim is actually one of these terms. It's a generic term to describe any disembodied member of the spiritual world. Okay, so there's lots of Elohim. We don't have polytheism in Psalm 82. We have a spiritual world populated with lots of spiritual beings. Sometimes they're called Ruchot, spirits. Sometimes they're called Elohim. Sometimes they're called holy ones. Whatever. There's this vocabulary that tells you what it is. And in that world, only Yahweh is distinct. He's what I call species unique. Only he has certain attributes that are assigned to him by biblical writers and denied to all other Elohim.
Okay.
That's important. But then you have another bucket. There you have terms of rank and hierarchy. Sons of God is one of these. It's language drawn from the royal court. The kings would give their relatives the best jobs. Family members. The most important, significant positions. This is all it is. Then you have a third bucket that describes role or function. This is where you actually get angel. It's a messenger. Cherub, a throne guardian, guards sacred space. Same thing for seraphim. Seraphim and cherubim are not angels. They're just job descriptions of any given member of the heavenly host. This is why angels really are never depicted with wings, because cherubim and seraphim are not angels in an Israelite world, okay? But in our world, we smash all this vocabulary together.
Gotcha.
And the white hats are angels and the black hats are demons, because that's the way we're taught in church. That's the way we're taught, in church tradition, throughout church history. So a lot of it gets lost because of language. A lot of it gets lost because of worldview. When you get to the bad guys, you realize that, okay, we've got one rebellion in Genesis 3, a supernatural being. We know the story of the garden. Genesis 6, you've got another set. Okay, now you got a set, sons of God that transgress, the boundary of heaven and earth. They produce Nephilim. When they die, then their spirits, one of the terms that are used in the Old Testament of the descendants of the Nephilim is Rephaim.
Mm-hmm.
You actually see them in Sheol, in the underworld, in various Old Testament passages. That's actually where the Second Temple Jews that you thought were crazy, where they get this notion that demons are the disembodied spirits of dead Nephilim, dead giant clans. That's where you get it, and in a few passages in the prophets. And then you got a third set. Okay, what happens at Babel when the earth is divided up according to the number of the sons of God, according to Deuteronomy 32:8 in the Dead Sea Scrolls? So you got three sets of bad guys, and the middle set actually breaks into two. I mean, it's like it's a whole taxonomy that we are completely unfamiliar with, completely. And the reason it matters is if you have this worldview as a Jew in the first century, you expect the Messiah to show up and be master and corrector and reverser of all three. And Jesus is. What Jesus says and what he does in certain places at certain times in his ministry, those places and the terminology, they have backstories to them that run deep into the Old Testament. And in some of these, he actually picks very specifically certain groups of these to say a certain thing or be at a certain place and do something. We have lost all of that. Again, because we don't live in this world. We're taught as moderns to not see anything supernatural going on in Genesis 6. We never see what's going on at Babel because most of our Bibles at Deuteronomy 32:8 do not follow the Dead Sea Scrolls. So we miss 2 out of the 3 rebellions. We have an incomplete and confused, taxonomy. We don't know the vocabulary, but here we are. Here we are with my 60-minute, my 1 clock hour of exposure to this in 15 years of higher education. And I look back at it now, well, it's no wonder. It's no wonder. And again, what I try to do in these books is scholars, the text geeks, okay, let's just be honest with who I am and who these kind of people are, okay? The Hebrew people and the Greek people, everything I just described is like, yeah, we all know that because we study the primary sources. There's nothing new here, and there isn't, but it's almost entirely new to the average person in church or someone who really wants to get into the text of Scripture. And so I view my task as trying to take this content, this high peer-reviewed academic content, and making it decipherable, to people with an eye, toward how the supernatural and the natural world intersect intentionally in biblical theology.
Well, I think you do that well. Let me jump to some questions because it relates to the broader picture of what you're talking about. Kay Stevenson says, why is there demon possession in the New Testament but not in the Old Testament? It seems mysterious. Why does that pop up in the New, but we don't see it ever in the Old Testament?
It's a mystery by omission. In other words, there's 2 ways to answer this. One is the reality that the Old Testament itself is a very selective book. Okay, we don't get the episodes of everybody's life, even the biblical character's life, like Moses. Okay, we get little episodes in his life. We don't get the full, what happens every day. And we certainly don't get that with every people or every person. So it's an assumption, and a flawed one, to think that demons were not around possessing people in the Old Testament period and in the Second Temple period. Okay, that's the first problem. Okay. The second problem is, again, going back to why would they expect Messiah to cast out demons when there are no examples? And that actually really takes us into just some fascinating stuff. I'm a host of a podcast, Naked Bible Podcast, and we did a full episode on Psalm 91, I don't know, a month or 2 ago. And again, I just try to take scholarship and make it decipherable. So I said, we don't realize that Psalm 91 was actually one of the Psalms discovered at Qumran in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And it was in a jar, and it was lumped in with 4 other Psalms that we don't have in the Hebrew Bible. Those 4 other Psalms are exorcistic psalms, like casting out demons. And so, well, there's evidence that they know about it and it's going on. And the neat thing is a lot of the vocabulary from those other four are found in Psalm 91.
Oh, that's interesting.
If you read Psalm 91 as again a first century person or an Israelite, you would realize that words in English like pestilence, plague, the arrow that flies, in midday, all this stuff. There's 4 or 5 terms there in Hebrew that are actually names of Canaanite deities that the Septuagint calls daimonion, demons.
Wow.
Okay. So we did a whole episode on this, basically showing that in the intertestamental period there was a very strong tradition that David and Solomon, in the Septuagint, by the way, Psalm 91 is called a Psalm of David, but it's not in the Masoretic text. There's another angle, but there was a very strong tradition that David and Solomon both had power to cast out demons. And so when Jesus comes along, put yourself in the shoes of the first century Jew. Oh, there's Jesus again. That's the carpenter's son. What nutty thing is he going to say today? Another Fruit Loop. Another one claiming to be the Messiah. And so let's go out and listen. I don't want to watch CNN, so let's go watch Jesus. So you go out there, and Jesus starts saying this stuff that you're not buying, and then all of a sudden he starts casting out demons. And you look at that and you think, well, maybe we should listen to him. It might be a good idea because the Son of David, the Messiah, we were taught to expect this based on the precedent of David and Solomon. And that runs very deeply, through their culture. And here we got a guy that's saying, I'm the son of David, and he's doing this. And it's like, okay, that's different. Let's pay attention. There's a lot. This Psalm 91 is actually the psalm that Satan quotes to Jesus.
Oh, that's interesting.
In the middle one. He picks that psalm. There's a lot going on there. I don't want to rabbit trail.
Yeah.
But there's some really cool stuff in the temptation going on there with that specifically. There's a reason he picks that psalm.
Now, I'm going to in a minute, I'm going to go to your question, Ben. This is great. But you mentioned the temptation. And one of the things you talk about in the book is that the ancients, in particular the Jews, would see natural disasters, that there was kind of spiritual forces behind them. So the desert was a place that was outside of kind of the kingdom and space of God, and it was a dangerous place, which helps us understand the temptation in a unique way. That's where Jesus went to be tempted by Satan. So how did the ancients, in particular the Bible, when they looked at natural disasters, flood, forest fires, you name it, did they think demons caused all that, some of that? How did they view that intersection between the natural world and the supernatural world?
Mm-hmm. There's a couple of ways to approach this. On the one hand, it was very common, again, to take things like meteorological phenomena and attribute it to divine activity. Because, again, this is a pre-modern world. So that's very common in Canaanite. You see this in Canaanite religion and other ancient Near Eastern religions all the time. And some of the deities that were perceived or believed to be behind these things from other pantheons do show up in the Hebrew Bible. But you have certain passages where those, the usual suspects are sort of subservient to Yahweh. There's a passage in Habakkuk, for instance, where some of these deities behind the forces are sort of just kind of in a retinue that they're like puppies on leashes, It's that kind of thing. And so for the Israelite, the biblical writer, the whole point was that no, God is in charge, of all of this. We don't have other deities running around here causing this stuff. God is behind what we experience in life, including, natural phenomenon. And we still think that today. We don't think that when it rains, God's up there shaking a cloud, okay? But ultimately, we do we do have a big enough view of God's sovereignty that he could do something like that. And in other words, so it's not really that far from where we're at. but it was more or less, chaos, and the forces of chaos were under the thumb of the God of Israel. He was ultimately in control of these things. It wasn't just something running amok, among a pantheon like that. Now, the interesting, thing as well is forces of chaos is a term that scholars like to use to describe anything that is life-threatening or anything that is just makes life really difficult for the ancient person. Think of it this way. Things like floods and earthquakes and in the desert are Eden. They are the opposite of Eden. They are the opposite of the perfection that God created specifically for humans, the habitable world that he made. And so once Eden erupts and chaos becomes, unrestrained, all the things that make life miserable or life-threatening get sort of cast as oppositional to God's original design and intent. And so you have this, what God wants, and the opposite, anti-Eden. And the desert was thrown into this bucket because there's not enough water. You can't live in a desert. You don't have enough to eat. You don't have enough water. Yeah, you can go there for a while, but you hope you find an oasis. And incidentally, doesn't that remind you of Eden, a paradise garden? Okay, so you got this oppositional stuff going on, and God, tends in the patriarchal era, God tends to have encounters with people like trees, not oases. Why? Because it's an Edenic image. Okay, this is why. This is how it originally was. This is where God's presence originally was. So you have these two things played off against each other. And part of that in the wilderness wanderings, when they do like Leviticus 16 with the scapegoats, okay, the two goats.
Yep.
The one that's killed, the blood is applied to the sanctuary, sprinkled on the ark and all that kind of stuff. It decontaminates the sanctuary. It's never applied to people. But we could go for a couple hours on how we misunderstand the sacrificial system. Okay.
Sure.
The Day of Atonement was like hitting the reset button. Like think of your computer analogy. Okay, hit the button. Now it's restored to its pristine condition, like when it was made, ready for another year of use. Okay, so it decontaminates sacred space. And then the other goat is not killed, but the high priest lays his hands on the head of the goat and they send it out of the camp into the wilderness. Well, of course you'd send it into the wilderness because that's where all the anti-Eden stuff is. Sin doesn't have a place in Yahweh's sacred domain. So of course you send it out. And again, there's a lot of crime and punishment and certain laws that are in Leviticus that illustrate the same concept. And this is not a ransom to Satan. The Leviticus 16 says the second goat was for Azazel, which is it's not only a name of a demon in Second Temple literature, it's a Satan figure in Second Temple intertestamental literature. But even before that, it was a demonic figure, that term.
Okay.
It's not a ransom or a sacrifice to this other deity because it's not killed. Okay, it's just driven away to where where the bad things are. Okay, the bad things are outside of Yahweh's sacred space. Where his presence is, there's life, there's abundance, it's wonderful. We're on the way to a land that flows with milk and honey. Again, it's supposed to make you think of Eden, all right? There's this wonderful place. And on the way, we're all together collectively in the camp of Israel, but outside the camp, we don't want to be outside the camp because that territory is not sacred space to Yahweh, is it? And again, it gets defined as the opposite, all this oppositional, kind of thinking. So of course they drive it out, because that's where sin belongs. It doesn't belong here. And of course, when Jesus encounters Satan, the Holy Spirit drives him into the wilderness. Well, where else would you expect to find Satan? Of course, he's out there. He's not again in sacred space, the holy, Jerusalem. It's oppositional binary kind of thinking.
Yep.
It's there to illustrate Eden and anti-Eden.
And this is so interesting. It transforms the way you read the New Testament because I've taught Old Testament for years to high school students. before I came to Biola, and I would teach the scapegoat. They'd sacrifice one to decontaminate or cleanse them of sins, send the other one away from the people with the blame. But where they go in the desert and what that represented changes everything in terms of our understanding. That Azazel was there, a demon-type being would get his due. That's fascinating. So tell me, I started this 10-part series on like Twitter, Instagram of like the strangest passages in the Bible, and I sent out just like 1 minute answers, which is impossible. But I asked people, I said, which ones do you want me to address? And one of the top ones was Genesis 6. These sons of God who impregnate these women are these angels. Like, what on earth is going on? Now, I know we could spend 2 hours unpacking this, but like kind of as simply as we can, you explain this Mesopotamian background. What is going on in Genesis chapter 6?
Yeah, well, let's start with the familiar material. So we have Genesis 6, and I'm going to loop verse 5 in here because it's important, not just 1 through 4, but 1 through 5. And it's the sons of God cohabiting with the daughters of men, and they have Nephilim and blah, 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 blah. And then somehow all that stuff leads to verse 5. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and every thought of the imagination of his heart was only evil continually. Like, how do you get from the first 4 verses to verse 5? So that's one question. And what about all this weird stuff? Again, that's the other question. Well, if you go to the New Testament, Peter, in 2 Peter 2, refers to the angels, plural, that sinned at the time of the flood. Okay, let's, final Jeopardy question. What could that possibly refer to? Okay, there's only one candidate, and that's Genesis 6. Now, in Christian theology, which sometimes veers into Christian mythology, we have this teaching. I personally think this is Paradise Lost. John Milton. We need to blame him, but that's probably saying too much. That this idea of, when Satan fell, when he became corrupt, he took a third of the angels with him, and that's what Peter's referring to. Oh, really? Can you show me a verse that says that? Okay, surprise, surprise. There isn't a single verse in the Bible that says a third of the angels fell when Satan fell or before, Adam and Eve or anything like that. In fact, if you use your Bible software and you look up 3 or third and, the word angel in the same verse, it happens one time. And that's the last book of the Bible, book of Revelation, Revelation 12. And if you read that, the war in heaven erupts in response to the birth of the Messiah, which makes a lot of sense. Satan's not happy. Okay, we got to kill the child, all right? There's nothing in the Bible about a third of the angels rebelling with Satan. So you've got one candidate. Now, Peter uses a very important term. He says that these beings, these angels, are kept in chains of gloomy darkness. They're sent to, your English translations probably have hell or Hades.
Okay.
Verb in Greek is tartarao. They're sent to Tartarus. It's an important term because that is the classical Greek term for where the Titans are punished and sent and imprisoned. Again, and there's a giant story in there and all this stuff. So Peter's acquainted with that. He also says kept in chains of gloomy darkness. You don't get that in Genesis 6, do you? No, you don't. Where does he get that detail? Well, he might get it from the Greek story, but he probably gets it from Second Temple material, books like Enoch or the Genesis Apocrypha, that's what we call it. Some of the Dead Sea Scrolls, they have these details in them. And some of them actually refer to Gilgamesh while they're doing it, which is very interesting because if you go back and you actually search, and somebody did this in 2010, his name is Amar Anus. He's in Helsinki. He's a cuneiform scholar. Can we find specific Mesopotamian information? Because we all know that Mesopotamia had these flood stories. I mean, that's everybody kind of knows that, from even YouTube and the internet. All right. Okay. Can you find specific elements about divine beings? And then there's a flood, and on the other side of the flood, they're like quasi-divine. They're like not really divine, but only partially divine, and giants. All this weird Genesis 6, 1 through 4 stuff. And the answer is yeah. Yeah, you can. It's the Mesopotamian Apkallu story. And the bad guys in that story are imprisoned by Marduk and the higher gods who wanted to destroy humanity with a flood. And the Apkallu said, "This is terrible. We've invested a lot of time in these people. We've got to teach, preserve the knowledge that we gave them, and blah 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 blah." They're the heroes in the Mesopotamian story. They're the villains, of course, in Genesis. But there is a Mesopotamian backstory that accounts for every point of Genesis 6:1 through 4 and 5, because the knowledge corrupts humanity. If you're a Mesopotamian, you'd say, no, it doesn't. It's why we're great. It's why Babylon's great. Astrology, idolatry, all the stuff that Babylon would be associated with. And the biblical writers are, no, that just helps us destroy ourselves more efficiently. It's evil, it's wicked. And so Genesis 6:1 through 5 is written as pushback against a Mesopotamian worldview, which lots of things in Genesis 1 through 11 are. They are pushback against the pagan pantheons of other civilizations. This is no different. Now, I will throw this out to your audience. Now, I worked at Logos for 14 years. This is probably not a secret, but I got everything free. Okay. So when I came across Anus's article in 2010 about the Apkallu, my first thought was, how did I miss that? Well, I did a search through all of the commentaries that Logos has, all of the books, the whole library. I found 2 commentaries that mention the word. They don't discuss the data. They literally, all they do is mention the word. I could only find 2 publications before 2010. This became a mission of mine, okay?
Wow.
Kvanvig's book on the primeval Genesis and Ann Kilmer's article in a Festschrift deal with the material. It wasn't until 2010 that somebody published all this stuff. And what that means is that if you're using a Genesis commentary that doesn't say anything about what I just said, it is by definition obsolete. Okay?
Wow.
It is obsolete.
Wow.
So there's a truckload of data here that needs to be dealt with. And it's not adequate just to say, well, that's just freaky. I don't want to believe that. Mike, how does Genesis 6 work? Explain that to me scientifically? And my answer is, I don't know. I don't know how it works. Can you explain to me scientifically how the virgin birth works? How the resurrection works? How the hypostatic union works? Here we are back to the selective supernaturalism.
Yeah, that's the point
Okay,
earlier.
As soon as you tell me how you can rationally explain that in a scientific worldview, then you'll have me. But until then, it's an issue that I think we need to struggle with. My answer is I don't know, because I'm not a deity. All right, confession. I'm not a deity.
Okay.
So I don't really know what deities can or cannot do.
Let me jump in and ask that just so I understand. So people who try to understand Genesis 6 from a natural standpoint, like it's, say, the lineage of Seth or kings on the earth during that day, that's out. Something supernatural is going on.
All of those views fundamentally ignore the Mesopotamian context for Genesis 6, 1 through 5. They don't deal with it at all. And not only that, but they have their own internal contradictions. So the sons of God are the Sethites. Got it. Does that mean that no women were godly? And the daughters of men were evil? Or I guess that's the line of Cain. So like they're all evil. The women are evil and the Sethites are good guys. Come on.
It falls apart when you look at the details.
And not only that, but did somebody tell Peter? Like, could somebody have please told Peter, like so that Peter didn't get this wrong? Everybody in the ancient world, I can only think of one exception, one text, prior to the 4th century AD, that did not take the supernatural view. This is in church history. Irenaeus is all over this stuff.
Wow.
Tertullian is all over this stuff. All the Jewish traditions are all lockstep. Okay. It isn't until the time, Augustine's the one that really changed the tide and championed the Sethite view. There was a guy before him, a few years before him, Julius Africanus, rejected the supernatural view of Genesis 6, but its champion was Augustine. And I personally think that part of his resistance to it was his own distaste for the Manichees. When he was originally converted, he was part of the Manichean sect, and then he left them, and they revered books like Enoch. So I think he had a bit of an axe to grind there, but for whatever reason, he was the champion of the Sephite view.
So just so I understand, when the Mesopotamian understanding is brought in, they're not saying this is a fictional story and critiquing it. They're saying something to do with these kind of gods or demonic beings came down, became embodied, had sex with these women, and he's critiquing the Mesopotamian version of it. But something like that really did happen supernaturally, and we may not know exactly what it is.
Right. That's what's in the text.
Okay.
Again, this event, it's really fast. People can find the Amar Anus, just Google drmsh.com and put in AMARANNUS, and you'll find his article because it's publicly accessible. But if you go back and look at that, the catalog of things that these supernatural beings in the Enoch story teach humans at the time of the flood as part of this Genesis 6 story, the Enoch's retelling of the story, that list of things that they teach humans to corrupt them, and again, to more efficiently destroy themselves and turn humanity toward idolatry. You can find all of those things in the Mesopotamian material of teachings of the Apkallu.
Interesting.
Again, it's just point for point. It's all the way across the board. In Mesopotamia, archaeologists have found figurines of the Apkallu. Again, in Mesopotamia, they were good guys. Okay, they were good spirits. All right, and they would bury these figurines in building, in like kind of like not headstones, but like cornerstones. They would bury them in building foundations. And the Akkadian term for them is matzare. Guess what that means? It means watcher, which is the term Enoch uses for the sons of God in Genesis 6. Mm-hmm. It's just bang, 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 it's just right on down the road. So again, what I'm saying is, if you want to understand Genesis 6, 1 through 5, you must read it against what it's shooting at. And it's shooting at the Babylonian version of these pre-flood events. It is trying to say this was a disaster. This is part of the chaos that is Babylon. Here it is again. And so I think it's an important thing because it does leak out into the New Testament.
It does.
It leaks out into the New Testament in some interest. I'll give you just one. Why are demons? Again, if you're thinking like a first century Jew, demons are disembodied spirits of the dead Nephilim, okay? Why are demons called unclean spirits in the Gospels and in the Dead Sea Scrolls and in Second Temple literature? There's a whole dissertation on this. It's by a guy named Wallen, Wahlen. I footnote him in the Demons book. It's because in the Levitical worldview, unclean is defined by forbidden mixture. That's what they are. The term absolute, it's not because they're icky. I got to wash my hands now. Okay. No, it's because they're the product of a forbidden mixture. Why do the Dead Sea Scrolls call them bastard spirits? Well, because that's what they are. They have this terminology that we never sort of, like with unclean spirits, we never really think about it. Like why this term and not some other term? And again, in the context of its wider worldview, it makes really good sense, why they would use that term. There are other things, that passages it leaks into. I think the Watcher shows up in Revelation 9. I can't prove that, but I suspect that the beings unleashed from the pit in Revelation 9, that this is what it's referring to, their final release before the day of the Lord. There's just stuff like that.
That is so interesting. I feel like we could do a whole show or two just on the Genesis 6 passage, because this is really a revolution in scholarship in the past decade, which is a short period of time when it comes to scholarship that's changing how we understand this. Let me ask you one, Ben. I mentioned I was going to ask this a while ago, and then we're going to go to the real kind of quick answers, some of these practical questions people would have about demons. But he says in Psalm 72, it talks about the divine council and God pronouncing judgment over them. Would these beings be considered demons in our modern lens? And he's asking about Psalms 82. But
Yeah.
you also have this divine counsel in Genesis 1. It
Mhm.
seems to be in Genesis 6, Genesis 11.
Mhm.
What
Mhm.
is this divine counsel where it
Yeah.
says, let us make man in our image? I think is related to this.
Yeah. Divine counsel is a term that derives from Psalm 82 and Psalm 89, a few other places in the Hebrew Bible. It refers to the heavenly host. Okay, that's more familiar terminology for us. I mean, there's rank distinction and all that stuff. We don't need to worry about that for the sake of this question. So it's the heavenly host. And again, what's going on in Psalm 82 is God is angry. And he's specifically angry at this group of Elohim. Well, who are they? If you go back to, again, you brought up Genesis 11 with Babel. Now, your listeners have heard me say that there was a supernatural rebellion at Babel. And some of them, if they read, everybody, if you read Genesis 11, where are the demons there? I don't see them. Well, you're not going to see them. If you go to Deuteronomy 32, 8 and 9, it says, when the Most High, we know who that is. Again, that's not difficult. Okay, when the Most High divided up the nations and he fixed their borders. And we know when that happened, that's Babel, okay, because we get the list of nations, Genesis 10, that go with the Genesis 11 story. When the Most High divided the nations and he fixed their borders, he divided them up according to the number of the sons of God. There's that phrase again, sons of God. It's always divine beings in the Old Testament. And then verse 9 says, but Israel is Yahweh's portion. Jacob is going to be his allotted inheritance. And what it means is that at Babel, God is fed up. Okay, we had the fall, I forgave you. We had the flood, I'm never going to do that again. And I thought that straightened everything out. I told you to disperse. I repeated the Edenic mandate to you. Go out, be fruitful, multiply. We're going to kickstart Eden again here, and look at what you're doing. The narrative actually says, it has people at Babel saying, let's build us a tower so that we don't have to disperse, like exactly opposite what they're supposed to do. And God has had it. So what he does is he divorces humanity. I've had enough. I refer to this as the Romans 1 event of the Old Testament. You don't want me to be your God? You're not going to listen to me? Let's see how that works. And he assigns the nations, these peoples that he creates at Babel, to other members of the heavenly host. And he assigns members of the heavenly host to them. There's two sides of that same coin. And we know that's the case because if you go to Deuteronomy 4, 19 and 20, that's the parallel to Deuteronomy 32, 8, 9. It says the same thing, that God allots the heavenly host to other nations, not Israel, other nations. Deuteronomy 17, Deuteronomy 29. I mean, you got this whole thing through Deuteronomy. And what that means is that after Babel, the entire world, as they know it, all the nations are under dominion of some deity other than Yahweh, because he's had it. And so what God decides to do is, okay, they're your placeholders now. I'm going to go call this guy Abram and his wife, and they can't have kids, so they're perfect. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to supernaturally give them a child, and I'm going to start over. This is my new humanity, Israel. And he makes a covenant with Abraham and says, now look, I know I just divorced all the nations. I was really ticked. But it's going to be through you and your seed that ultimately all of them are going to be blessed. So God wants the nations governed according to his own character, according to his principles of justice. He still loves humanity because they're created in his image. They're his imagers. But what happens, we're not told when, we're just told by the time we get to Psalm 82, God is angry. And if you read why he's angry with the other gods, and he actually calls them sons of the Most High in Psalm 82, verse 6. So it's a direct link back to Deuteronomy 32. He's charging them with sowing chaos among their nations, enslaving their populations, in just treating people like garbage. And he's had it. And at the end of the psalm, the psalmist rises up and exclaims, oh God, rise up and take back the nations. Okay, this is the vision. This is what's going on in Psalm 82. So God has had many dealings with his supernatural heavenly host. Some of them rebel. Some of them transgress, Genesis 6. Some of them he gives jobs to, and they either fail gloriously, okay, they fail what they're supposed to do after Babel, or they don't give a rip. Because we also learn from Deuteronomy 32:17 that these shadim, again, there's your territorial entity term. It's not a demon like in the Gospels, but it's a territorial entity, which makes perfect sense because all the nations are under dominion. By the way, this is where Daniel gets his theology. There's another question we never ask. Oh, the Prince of Persia, Prince of Greece, supernatural beings over geopolitical nations. Yeah, I get it. Hey, where'd Daniel get that? I'll tell you where he got it. He got it in Deuteronomy 32:8-9. That's where he got it. Okay, it's just biblical theology. So, God has had plenty of dealings with the heavenly host, and they're not all good. We're told 3 times in Job that God doesn't trust his holy ones. Well, I guess not. I mean, he knows that they're not him. They're not perfect in their nature. He has given that, he shared his attributes with them, one of which is freedom, free will, and that goes all the way back to Genesis. When I don't believe Genesis 1:26 has anything to do with the Trinity. And that's basic. That's the basic view in church tradition. And the reason I don't, I'm going to read you something in Genesis 11. This is the only place you get the "let us" language. Like in Genesis 1:26. You see it in Genesis 11. It says, "Then they said, 'Come, let us build ourselves a city, a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves.'" Okay, lest we be dispersed. We don't want to obey God. Boy, that would be terrible. Let's just do this. And then verse 5 it says, "The Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men had built. And the Lord said, Behold, they're one people, they have all one language." It's only the beginning of what they're going to do. Nothing they propose to do will be impossible for them. "Come, let us go down and confuse their language." Now, wait a minute. If the "let us" is the Trinity, I would suggest that the other 2 persons are already down. Okay? That's like standard Trinitarian thinking. The persons are not like, some of them are here and some of them are there. We're not modalists, okay?
Yeah.
So if this passage shows you that we're not talking Trinity here, we're talking God is speaking to his heavenly host. And that makes the most sense in Genesis, also because why would he have to announce, hey, let's create humanity? If they're members of the Trinity, they already know that. They're not learning anything, okay? I mean, because they're co-eternal and co-omniscient. How can they learn anything? What's the point? So, there's a number of obstacles to the traditional view. And what I think is going on there is God had a supernatural family from the very beginning. That's Job 38. Sons of God witness the creation of the world. They're there watching. And God says, is my paraphrase, boy, this is cool. You know what? I like having a family. I like creating beings like myself to be my children and to participate with me in doing stuff that I think needs to be done. You know what? I'm going to try it again, but I'm going to make them a little different. I'm going to give them bodies this time. I'm going to create embodied beings. And you know what? If I do that, they need a place to live because they're embodied. So let's create the world, and we're going to create, humans. We'll call them humans, to live in this world. And they can't come to us. So let's go down there and live with the humans. We'll take a little place of this earth and we'll call it Eden and we'll live there because where God is, his entourage is. This is standard theophany throne imagery, in the Bible. God goes down there with his supernatural family, his entourage. He creates humans. And in some way, the plurals in Genesis 1:26 telegraph now, in some way, the humans are like the members of the heavenly host, and they're also like God. Let us create humanity as our imagers. Okay, but yet when the creation happens in the next verse, it's singular. So God created them, male and female. He created them. Every verse in the Hebrew Bible, if you have Bible, right? If you have Bible software, every verb of creation with humanity as the object is singular. Okay, there's no ambiguity here. So what God's doing is he's announcing to his heavenly host, I got an awesome idea. Let's do this. And the reason it's plural is it telegraphs to the reader that somehow we are like them and like God. And how is that? Well, I'll tell you how it is. We have the same Father and the same Creator.
Okay.
He created them to be his proxy, his representatives, his agents, to do things in that world that he wants done. And that's why he created humanity. So the image of God is not a thing put in us. Okay, we're very vulnerable ethically if we think the image of God is a quality. Gets you in all sorts of ethical problems, especially with abortion and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It's not a thing, it's not a quality, it's a status. To be human at any level of development, to be human is to be God's imager. This is the embodied form, the embodied extension, okay? These are my kids, and I want them to be my partners as well. This is, and it's democratized. It's every human. It's not just the divine kings, okay, not the ancient Near Eastern world. It's everybody. And I mean, this is just fundamentally important stuff. And that's Genesis 1. So what I do, like in Unseen Realm, is I say, look, here's where it starts. By design, what the going to do, the family and his children partner with his partners on earth, because that's what God wanted to begin with. And it blows up, and God isn't giving up on it. He's going to get what he wants. He's going to get it back. And he's going to look at humans, again, to graft them back into this family. And you're going to have two tracks that follow each other through Scripture. You know, why is it that holy ones in the Old Testament overwhelmingly used for supernatural beings? It's never used in the plural in the New Testament for supernatural beings. You know who it's used of? Holy ones, hagioi in Greek. Terrible translation, saints. It's believers.
Wow.
Okay. In Hebrews 2, believers, that Jesus, who is our sibling, presents God to us and us to God. Where does he do it in Hebrews 2? In the congregation. It's in the council. What's the cloud of witnesses? It's not just the people in Hebrews 11. You keep reading Hebrews 12. It's the innumerable festal gathering of angels. You know, why is it in 1 Corinthians 6, when Paul is trying to get the Corinthians to stop bickering with each other? He says, look, you people, don't you know, 1 Corinthians 6:3, that you're going to rule angels? You're going to judge angels. What's he talking about? Well, he's talking about the eschatological concept, which we read about in Revelation 2 and 3, that he that overcomes, I will put him over the nations. Well, who's over the nations now? That would be the fallen sons of God. When they're destroyed, a la Psalm 82 and several other passages in the prophets, guess who replaces them? Guess who gets their jobs? That would be us. We will be what God intended us to be from the beginning. We will be fully brought into his council, his host. Humanity was created to be fit for sacred space. I mean, just think of that concept. It's the most natural thing in God's head, as it were, to look at humans and think they belong with me. You know, in the end, God is he steers everything back to the new Eden. We're over the nations. We replace the rebellious members of the council. It's not a coincidence. I mean, there's all these things that just interconnect in Scripture. And I have found, and again, look, I'm putting myself in the same bucket here. Okay, I'm no different than any of your listeners here. We have people who care about the Bible in our churches. They really do. And they have lots of data points in their head, but they have no framework for them.
Wow.
They don't know where to put them. So again, I think what Unseen Realm and then angels and demons, Unseen Realm is the structure. It's the framework. I say it's building the matrix, okay? And then angels and demons are kind of drilling down. What I'm trying to do fundamentally is give people a worldview structure to understand their Bible. I'm not going to protect them from their Bible anymore. Okay, that's just
I love it. Yeah.
Lost. Okay, I'm not going to do it anymore. This is your Bible. Walk in it, read it, and enjoy it. But you try to give them the structure, and then try to orient people with a simple thought that I had to have a poke in the eye. Read. You will get so much more out of it if you read the Bible, not thinking that it answers your questions. Not thinking that it was written by modern post-Enlightenment people. It wasn't written by us. They're not us. But read it with the Israelite in your head. Read it with the first century Jew in your head. how would they have thought about this passage? And you can do it. You really
Yeah.
can.
I love that approach, and that's what you do in the book. I mean, you take me, and I have a doctorate and master's. I've studied this stuff, the languages, and I'm
That was me in
going,
Wisconsin.
man,
How in
how
the
many? It's amazing. So those of you watching this, there was a question that just came up that said, are we exploring the questions whether demons are real or not? In a few weeks, I have on Billy Hallowell. He has a new book coming out with an investigation of the demonic realm. We're going to talk about the evidence for demons. What we've been taught.
He interviewed me for that, but I don't know if I made the book.
Oh, he mentioned that he talked to you when I chatted with him. Today we're talking with Dr. Michael Heiser about his book Demons. How do we theologically understand demons and put them together? Do you have time if I just throw out there and get like the tweet responses to the most common questions people ask? And I know it's painful because it's got to be fast, but I would love to know. These are the questions that people ask me all the time. Are demons fallen angels?
No, it's yes and no. The terminology is wrong because angel is just a job description. They are fallen supernatural beings. In a sense, they're actually second generation.
Okay.
Principalities and powers, that's Paul's terminology for the third group, the Deuteronomy 32 Babel group. They are definitely fallen supernatural beings. They are out of the will of God.
Oh, good job. That was quick. And by the way, angels are functional. So that's why you see human beings operating as angels. Is that correct, or did I miss that?
It's angelos. It's a messenger. Okay. In the angels book, I have this question: Do believers become angels, like when we die? And the answer is no. But what happens is we become glorified, and we have certain of the attributes in glorification that they also have. And so this is another good example where Christian tradition has smashed those things together.
Gotcha. That's helpful. Can demons be redeemed, or Satan be redeemed?
I don't believe so. I think Hebrews 2 specifically addresses this, where basically God did what he did, the plan of salvation, specifically for humans. And the proof of that in Hebrews 2 is the incarnation. In other words, God became a man. He didn't become anything else. He became a man. And the focus of his redemptive plan is humanity, not any other created being.
If demons and Satan know that they're going to lose in the end, why do they keep fighting now?
Do they? It depends how you define victory.
Okay.
If you define victory as, we're going to kill God someday, no, they're not idiots. Okay, they know that. They're not morons. If you define victory a different way, then you do have a game plan. And here's what I mean by that. Paul linked specifically the return of the Lord and the day of the Lord with, quote, the fullness of the Gentiles. Again, Paul is informed by the Deuteronomy 32 worldview. This is why he uses terms like principalities, powers, rulers, thrones, dominions instead of demons, because these are all terms of geographical dominion. He knows who he's dealing with. His focus in his ministry, because he's dealing with the nations, is the third set of rebels, okay? And God says, okay, when I have extracted all of the people I want from the nations and bring them back into relationship to me, bring them back into my family, then the end will come, the day of the Lord, and the Lord will return. Well, if I'm a principality and a power, and I know this, by now I do, before the crucifixion and resurrection, I don't think they knew certain things based on what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 2. But if I know this now, it's like, okay, what I'm hearing is all we need to do is keep the church from performing the Great Commission. We just blind people under our charge, under our influence to the gospel. Check, got that. We get the church distracted or lazy so that this doesn't happen. Check, check. I'm good with that because we'll just kick this can down the road forever.
Wow. God
has linked the return of his son and the day of the Lord to these people It's like that gives them a reason to continue. Because how do they define victory? We're still here. Yes, we don't have authority. Yes, our authority was stripped away. Paul writes this and that. Okay, we get it. But you know what? We're not giving up our turf. And we hate humans. We're not giving up on blinding them and robbing Yahweh of his children. That's why we're here. So we're going to kick this can down the road for a very long time. If you define victory like that, they're not doing too bad. They're really not doing too bad.
I think it was helpful you point out in the book that is their nature, and they act consistently with their nature and can't help it. That's what they are. That's what they do as a piece of it as well.
This is who they are.
Last question. This is helpful. Pine Creek says, if polytheism is defined as the belief that many gods exist, would Heiser be a polytheist under that definition?
No, because polytheism assumes an interchangeability and an equality of certain fundamental attributes that the biblical writers do not presume. So that's also what's wrong with henotheism. In henotheistic systems, they assume that the lead deity can be displaced at some point. It can be defeated, toppled by somebody else in the pantheon or whatever competition. The biblical writers aren't thinking that way at all. Again, Elohim, let's just back up a little bit. We are trained by our culture and by church. When we see the letters G, O, and D on a piece of paper or on a screen, we mentally, our brain assigns, and all these terms are important, our brain assigns a specific set of unique attributes to the letters G, O, and D. And so if you put an S on it, we can't have that because they're supposed to be unique attributes. That would be polytheism, okay? Well, the problem with that isn't how the biblical writers think about the word Elohim. How do we know? Because they use Elohim of 5 or 6 different things that are not the God of Israel. That alone tells you they are not assigning a specific set of unique attributes to the term Elohim. So to have a multiplicity of Elohim is nowhere near polytheism like we think of it. But in the West, in the modern West, and scholars are no different. I mean, I was bucking the trend in my dissertation, because this is essentially my dissertation stuff. There are very few exceptions. We don't stop to wonder, well, maybe we shouldn't just a priori assign a specific set of unique attributes to a certain term. Maybe we shouldn't do that, because the Hebrew Bible doesn't do that. Now, the theology that we have that Yahweh, the God of the Bible, is unique, that doesn't come from the term Elohim or any other specific term. What it comes from is that the biblical writers will say certain things about this Elohim that they won't say about any other, and they will in fact deny the things they say about this one Elohim to all the others. And here I am talking about attributes, omniscience, omnipotence, eternality. Those things are assigned to one Elohim of the bunch. Again, Elohim is just a generic term for a spiritual being.
Okay, thanks for watching. Let me know what you think about this in the comments. Arigato, matane, bye-bye.